The Johnson family arrived at their new home, a spacious house with a large yard in an upscale suburban neighborhood. Charles Johnson, a respected judge, watched his son Jamal tossing a football in the front yard. A smile of hope crossed his face as he imagined the possibilities this fresh start could bring for his family. Lisa Johnson, Charles's wife and a dedicated teacher, began unpacking boxes in the kitchen. She paused to look out the window, admiring the well-manicured lawns and tree-lined streets of their new community. The move had been a significant decision for the family, driven by the desire for better opportunities and a chance to break new ground in a predominantly white neighborhood. As the Johnsons settled in, their landlord, Mr. Reynolds, pulled up in his luxury car. His initial greeting seemed polite, but there was an underlying tension in his demeanor. While showing the family around the property, Reynolds made subtle comments that hinted at his discomfort with the new tenants. "You'll find this neighborhood quite particular about maintaining its character," Reynolds remarked, his eyes darting between Charles and Lisa. Charles felt a familiar unease creep into the atmosphere, recognizing the coded language for what it was. Later that evening, the Johnson family gathered for dinner in their new dining room. The conversation turned to their expectations for their new life. Lisa expressed her enthusiasm about promoting diversity at the local school where she'd secured a teaching position. "I think there's real potential to make a difference here," Lisa said, her voice filled with determination. The school could benefit from more inclusive programs and curricula. Jamal, picking at his food, voiced his concerns about starting at a new school. "What if I don't fit in? What if the other kids don't like me?" he asked, his usual confidence wavering. Charles reached out to squeeze his son's shoulder. "Remember, Jamal, you bring value just by being yourself. Give it time, and you'll find your place." As the family discussed their hopes and fears, they were acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. The subtle hostility from Reynolds was just the beginning. They knew that breaking barriers in this new environment would require strength, unity, and perseverance. Charles silently vowed to document any discriminatory behavior they encountered. As a judge, he understood the importance of evidence in fighting injustice. The Johnsons were prepared to face whatever came their way, determined to stand up for their rights and dignity in a society that still had much progress to make. The first maintenance issue in the Johnsons' new home occurred unexpectedly when the heating system malfunctioned during a cold spell. Charles called Mr. Reynolds to report the problem, and the landlord arrived the next day to assess the situation. As Reynolds examined the furnace, his demeanor shifted from forced politeness to barely concealed disdain. "I'm surprised it broke down so soon," he muttered, casting a sideways glance at Charles. "These things usually last longer with proper care." Charles bit back a retort, recognizing the implication in Reynolds' words. Instead, he calmly replied, "We've only been here a week, Mr. Reynolds. The issue likely predates our arrival." Meanwhile, Lisa faced her own challenges at her new teaching job. During a class discussion, she overheard a group of students making racist comments about Miguel, a Hispanic student. Lisa immediately intervened, addressing the issue head-on. After class, Lisa approached the school principal. "We need to be more proactive in combating discrimination," she insisted. "I'd like to propose a diversity awareness program for the school." The principal seemed hesitant but agreed to consider Lisa's suggestion. Determined to make a difference, Lisa began drafting a comprehensive plan to foster inclusivity and cultural understanding among students and staff. At home that evening, Jamal recounted his first day at the new school. His usual enthusiasm was noticeably dampened. "It was different," he said, avoiding eye contact with his parents. "Different how, son?" Charles probed gently. Jamal sighed. "Some kids kept staring at me. I heard whispers. Someone asked if I was lost and belonged in the other school district." Lisa and Charles exchanged worried glances. They had anticipated challenges, but the reality of their son facing direct discrimination hit hard. "Remember what we talked about, Jamal?" Lisa said, her voice firm but reassuring. "You have every right to be there. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Charles added, "If anyone gives you trouble, report it immediately. We'll support you every step of the way." As the family discussed strategies for navigating these obstacles, they realized that their fight for acceptance and equality would be an ongoing process. The subtle hostility from their landlord, the discriminatory attitudes at school, and the general unease in their new environment were all symptoms of deeper-rooted issues they would need to address. Despite the challenges, the Johnsons remained resolute. They knew that change often came with resistance, but they were prepared to stand their ground and work towards creating a more inclusive community, one step at a time. Charles Johnson, acutely aware of the delicate situation his family faced, made a strategic decision to keep his position as a judge under wraps for the time being. He understood that revealing his professional status might escalate tensions with Reynolds or lead to accusations of using his influence inappropriately. Instead, Charles focused on meticulously documenting every interaction and incident that hinted at discriminatory behavior. One evening, as Charles reviewed his notes, Lisa entered his study. "How are we going to handle this, Charles?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Carefully," Charles replied. "We need solid evidence before we can take any action. For now, we document everything and stay vigilant." Meanwhile, Lisa initiated a heart-to-heart conversation with Jamal about his experiences at school. To her surprise and relief, Jamal's demeanor had shifted from his initial anxiety to cautious optimism. "I've actually met some cool kids, Mom," Jamal said, a small smile forming. "There's this group that's really into social justice stuff. They've been super welcoming." Lisa felt a surge of pride. "That's wonderful, Jamal. Tell me more about them." Jamal went on to describe his new friends, a diverse group of students who shared his experiences with discrimination and were actively working to combat racism in their school. This unexpected alliance had given Jamal a sense of belonging and purpose. However, the family's challenges were far from over. One morning, as Lisa attempted to shower before work, she was met with a stream of ice-cold water. Charles checked the water heater and found it wasn't functioning. "This can't be a coincidence," Charles muttered, recalling the recent heating system failure. Lisa nodded grimly. "Do you think Reynolds is behind this?" Charles hesitated before responding. "We can't jump to conclusions without proof, but it's certainly suspicious." The family's suspicions of possible sabotage added a new layer of tension to their already stressful situation. They began to feel as if their home, meant to be a safe haven, was being used as a tool against them. Despite these setbacks, the Johnsons remained determined. They drew strength from each other and from the small victories, like Jamal finding allies at school. Charles continued his meticulous documentation. Lisa pressed on with her efforts to promote diversity at work, and Jamal grew more confident in navigating his new social landscape. As they faced each new challenge, the Johnsons' resolve only strengthened. They were not just fighting for their own comfort and safety, but for the right to be treated with dignity and respect in a community that seemed resistant to change. Charles Johnson, drawing on his legal expertise, began researching housing discrimination laws in depth. He spent evenings poring over legal texts and precedents, building a comprehensive understanding of their rights and potential courses of action against Reynolds. One night, as Lisa joined him in his study, Charles shared his findings. "The Fair Housing Act is clear on this," he explained. "If we can prove Reynolds is discriminating against us based on race, we have a solid case." Lisa nodded, her expression a mix of determination and concern. "How do we gather enough evidence without putting ourselves at risk?" Charles leaned back in his chair, considering. "We continue documenting everything, every interaction, every maintenance issue. And we might need to reach out to previous tenants, see if there's a pattern." Meanwhile, Jamal's involvement in his school's diversity project was proving to be a positive outlet. Working with his new friends, he helped develop a presentation on the impact of systemic racism in their community. During a project meeting, Jamal shared some of his family's experiences without revealing too much. "It's not just about individual acts," he explained to his peers. "It's about the systems that allow discrimination to continue." His teacher, impressed by the group's work, encouraged them to present their findings at the upcoming school board meeting. This opportunity filled Jamal with a sense of purpose and pride. As the Johnsons navigated these challenges, a new issue arose. An unexpected notice appeared on their door, a rent bill with an additional, unexplained fee. Charles examined the bill closely. "This wasn't in our lease agreement," he said, his brow furrowed. Lisa sighed heavily. "Do you think Reynolds is trying to push us out?" Charles nodded grimly. "It's possible, but this might be the evidence we need. It's time we take action." The family gathered in the living room to discuss their next steps. They weighed the risks of confronting Reynolds directly against the possibility of legal action. "We can't let him continue treating us this way," Lisa insisted. Jamal, showing a maturity beyond his years, added, "If we don't stand up to this, who will?" Charles looked at his family with pride. "You're right. We've been patient. We've documented everything. Now it's time to fight back. The right way." They decided to draft a formal complaint, outlining all the issues they'd faced since moving in. Charles would use his legal knowledge to ensure the complaint was comprehensive and legally sound. As they worked on the document together, the Johnsons felt a renewed sense of unity and purpose. They were no longer just enduring discrimination. They were actively challenging it, standing up not just for themselves, but for all those who might face similar treatment in the future. Lisa Johnson, motivated by her experiences and those of her students, decided to take a more active role in addressing discrimination within the school community. She organized a meeting with other parents to discuss the issues their children were facing. The meeting took place in the school library after hours. Parents from various backgrounds attended, many sharing similar stories of subtle and overt discrimination their children had encountered. "We can't ignore this anymore," Lisa stated firmly. "Our children deserve a safe and inclusive learning environment." A parent named Maria nodded in agreement. "My daughter was told to go back where she came from last week. She was born here." The group discussed various ideas, from diversity training for staff to revising the curriculum to be more inclusive. Lisa took notes, planning to present a comprehensive proposal to the school board. Meanwhile, at home, Charles shared his findings about Reynolds with Lisa. "I've uncovered a pattern," he explained, spreading out documents on the kitchen table. "Reynolds has a history of discriminatory practices. Previous tenants of color have all faced similar issues: unexpected fees, delayed maintenance, even eviction attempts." Lisa's eyes widened. "This is bigger than just us, isn't it?" Charles nodded gravely. "It is, and I think it's time we do something more substantial about it." The couple discussed their options late into the night. They weighed the risks of taking legal action against the potential impact it could have on their community and others facing similar discrimination. "We need to be strategic," Charles mused. "This isn't just about our situation anymore. We have a chance to set a precedent here." As they formulated their plan, Jamal knocked on their door. "Mom, Dad, I have an idea," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "My friends and I were thinking, what if we organized a peaceful demonstration to show that our community stands against discrimination?" Charles and Lisa exchanged glances, impressed by their son's initiative. "That's a powerful idea, Jamal," Lisa said. "But we need to be careful about how we approach this." The family spent the next few days reaching out to neighbors, friends, and community leaders. They were heartened by the positive response and the willingness of others to stand with them. They decided on a date for the demonstration, carefully planning every detail to ensure it remained peaceful and impactful. Signs were made, speeches were prepared, and a route was mapped out. As the day approached, the Johnsons felt a mix of anxiety and determination. They knew this action could have significant consequences, but they also recognized its importance. They were no longer just fighting for their own rights, but for the rights of their entire community. The day of the peaceful demonstration arrived. The Johnsons, along with a diverse group of supporters, gathered in the local park. The crowd was larger than they had anticipated, with people holding signs that read "End housing discrimination" and "Equality for all." As the demonstration began, local news crews arrived, their cameras capturing the scene. Charles, careful not to reveal his position as a judge, stood with his family at the front of the group. Lisa stepped forward to address the crowd and the media. "We're here today because discrimination has no place in our community," Lisa began, her voice strong and clear. "We demand fair treatment for all residents, regardless of their race or background." The crowd cheered in support as Lisa continued to speak about the importance of equality and justice. Jamal stood proudly beside his parents, holding a sign he had made himself. As the demonstration progressed peacefully through the neighborhood, more people joined in. The growing crowd caught the attention of passers-by, some of whom stopped to listen and show support. Suddenly, a commotion near the front of the group caught everyone's attention. Mr. Reynolds had appeared, his face red with anger. He pushed his way through the crowd, shouting at the demonstrators. "This is ridiculous. You're disrupting the peace of this neighborhood," Reynolds yelled, pointing accusingly at the Johnsons. "These people are troublemakers, trying to stir up problems where there aren't any." Charles stepped forward, maintaining his composure. "Mr. Reynolds, we have the right to peaceful assembly. We're here to address real issues affecting our community." Reynolds scoffed. "What do you know about rights? You're just causing trouble for decent folks." The crowd murmured in disapproval at Reynolds' outburst. Several people stepped forward to defend the Johnsons and the purpose of the demonstration. Amid the tension, Charles made a split-second decision. He knew it was time to reveal his identity. "Mr. Reynolds," he said calmly, "I think it's time you knew. I'm not just your tenant. I'm Judge Charles Johnson." A hush fell over the crowd. Reynolds' face paled as he realized the implications of his actions and words in front of a judge. "This demonstration is not about causing trouble," Charles continued, addressing both Reynolds and the crowd. "It's about bringing attention to systemic issues that have been ignored for too long. We're here to promote change and ensure fair treatment for all members of our community." The revelation of Charles's identity sent shockwaves through the gathering. Media reporters rushed to capture this unexpected turn of events, while the demonstrators cheered even louder, emboldened by the knowledge that they had a judge standing with them. As Reynolds retreated, visibly shaken, the Johnsons knew that their fight for justice had just entered a new, more public phase. The demonstration had achieved its goal of bringing attention to the issue, but it was clear that the real work was just beginning. The revelation of Charles Johnson's identity as a judge sent ripples through the community. Local news outlets picked up the story, running headlines like "Judge Leads Fight Against Housing Discrimination." The increased media attention brought a surge of support for the Johnsons and their cause. Charles received calls from civil rights organizations offering assistance. Legal experts reached out, volunteering to help build a case against Reynolds. The family's inbox filled with messages of solidarity from people who had faced similar discrimination. However, the newfound publicity also brought challenges. Reynolds, feeling cornered and exposed, began to retaliate. He sent a formal eviction notice to the Johnsons, citing false claims of property damage and lease violations. "He's trying to intimidate us," Charles said, reviewing the notice with Lisa. "But this only strengthens our case against him." Lisa nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We're not backing down now. Too many people are counting on us." Meanwhile, the pressure from the community led to a formal investigation into Reynolds' rental practices. City officials announced they would be reviewing complaints against him and examining his rental history for patterns of discrimination. Reynolds, desperate to defend himself, began spreading lies about the Johnsons. He gave interviews to sympathetic media outlets, painting himself as a victim of a politically correct witch hunt. "The Johnsons are using their position to bully an honest businessman," Reynolds claimed in one interview. "They're the ones causing division in our community." These accusations only fueled the Johnsons' resolve. They knew that Reynolds' desperate attempts to discredit them were a sign that they were making progress. The tension between the Johnsons and Reynolds escalated further when anonymous threats began arriving at their home. Notes with racist slurs were left in their mailbox, and late-night phone calls disrupted their sleep. Charles immediately reported these incidents to the police, who began an investigation. The family installed security cameras and remained vigilant, refusing to be intimidated. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Charles told his family during a tense dinner discussion. "But we can't let fear stop us from doing what's right." Jamal, showing remarkable courage, added, "We're making a difference, aren't we? That's why they're scared." Lisa reached out to squeeze her son's hand. "That's right, Jamal. Change is never easy, but it's necessary." As the Johnsons navigated this increasingly complex situation, they drew strength from each other and from the growing support in their community. They knew that their fight was no longer just about their own housing situation. It had become a catalyst for addressing long-standing issues of discrimination in their city. The family began preparing for the legal battle ahead, gathering evidence and working with their supporters to build a strong case against Reynolds. Despite the challenges and threats, they remained committed to their goal of exposing and combating housing discrimination, not just for themselves, but for all those who had suffered in silence for too long. As the date of the court hearing approached, the Johnson family intensified their preparations. Charles, drawing on his legal expertise, meticulously organized the evidence they had gathered over the months. This included recorded conversations with Reynolds, documented incidents of neglect and harassment, and testimonies from previous tenants who had faced similar discrimination. Lisa spent her evenings after work contacting potential witnesses. She reached out to neighbors, community leaders, and even former employees of Reynolds who might be willing to testify about his discriminatory practices. "We've got a strong case," Charles told Lisa as they reviewed their files. "But we need to be prepared for anything Reynolds might throw at us." Meanwhile, the local chapter of the NAACP and several civil rights attorneys offered their support, helping to strengthen the Johnsons' legal strategy. They advised on key points of law and helped prepare Charles for potential cross-examination. As news of the upcoming hearing spread, the community rallied around the Johnsons. A group of supporters organized a vigil outside the courthouse, planning to be present throughout the proceedings as a show of solidarity. The night before the hearing, the family gathered in the living room for a final discussion. "Remember," Charles said, looking at Lisa and Jamal, "no matter what happens in that courtroom, we've already won by standing up for what's right." Lisa nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of determination and anxiety. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for everyone who's ever been discriminated against in housing." Jamal, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "I'm proud of us, Mom and Dad. We're making history, aren't we?" The morning of the hearing arrived with a palpable tension in the air. As the Johnsons approached the courthouse, they were met by a crowd of supporters holding signs and cheering words of encouragement. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reynolds sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of defiance. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, Charles took a deep breath, ready to present their case. The hearing started with opening statements. The Johnsons' lawyer eloquently laid out the pattern of discrimination, emphasizing the broader implications of the case for fair housing practices. Reynolds' attorney attempted to paint the Johnsons as troublemakers seeking attention, but their arguments seemed weak in the face of the overwhelming evidence. As witnesses were called and testimonies given, the true extent of Reynolds' discriminatory practices began to unfold. Former tenants spoke of similar experiences, painting a clear picture of systemic racism in Reynolds' rental policies. Throughout the proceedings, the Johnsons remained composed, their unity and determination evident to everyone in the courtroom. They knew that regardless of the outcome, they had already succeeded in bringing this important issue to light. As the hearing progressed, Charles Johnson took the stand to present the evidence he had meticulously gathered. With calm precision, he laid out a timeline of events, starting from their first interaction with Reynolds to the most recent incidents of harassment. "Your Honor," Charles began, his voice steady, "what we've experienced is not isolated. It's part of a systemic problem that has affected numerous families in our community." He proceeded to play recordings of conversations with Reynolds, where subtle but clear discriminatory language was used. The courtroom listened intently as Reynolds' voice, filled with thinly veiled prejudice, echoed through the speakers. Reynolds' attorney attempted to object, claiming the recordings were obtained without consent, but the judge overruled, stating that they were relevant to the case at hand. As Charles concluded his testimony, Reynolds' demeanor visibly changed. The landlord's confident facade began to crumble under the weight of the evidence presented against him. Next, Lisa took the stand. She spoke eloquently about the impact the discrimination had on their family, particularly on Jamal. "Our son should feel safe and welcome in his own home," Lisa said, her voice filled with emotion. "Instead, he's had to face hostility and prejudice in what should be his sanctuary." Jamal's testimony followed. Despite his youth, he spoke with remarkable composure about his experiences. "I used to think it was normal to feel unwelcome," Jamal said. "But now I know it's not right, and it's not legal. Reynolds' attorney tried to paint the Johnsons' actions as an overreaction to simple misunderstandings, but their arguments felt hollow in the face of the compelling testimonies and evidence. As the final arguments were presented, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge, who had remained impassive throughout the proceedings, now looked thoughtful as he considered the case before him. "Before I make my decision," the judge announced, "I want to commend the Johnson family for their courage in bringing this case forward. Regardless of the outcome, you have shed light on an important issue that affects many in our community." The courtroom fell silent as everyone awaited the judge's verdict. Charles reached for Lisa's hand, while Jamal sat up straighter in his seat. They had done everything they could to expose the truth and fight for justice. Now it was up to the court to decide. As the judge prepared to deliver his decision, the Johnsons and their supporters held their breath, hoping that their fight would lead to a landmark decision against housing discrimination. The judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom before settling on Reynolds. In light of the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds Mr. Reynolds guilty of housing discrimination. His actions are in clear violation of the Fair Housing Act. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muted cheers from the Johnson supporters. The judge continued, outlining the penalties Reynolds would face. Mr. Reynolds is hereby ordered to pay substantial damages to the Johnson family and undergo mandatory fair housing training. Furthermore, his rental practices will be subject to monitoring for the next 5 years to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination laws. As the judge's words sank in, the Johnsons embraced each other, their eyes brimming with tears of relief and triumph. Their long fight had finally yielded results. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters erupted in celebration as the news spread. Lisa addressed the gathering, her voice filled with emotion. "This victory isn't just for us. It's for everyone who has ever faced discrimination in housing. Today, justice prevailed." However, the celebration was short-lived. As the crowd dispersed, Reynolds approached the Johnsons, his face contorted with anger. "You think this is over?" he snarled. "I've got friends in high places. I know things about you, Charles, things that could ruin your career." Charles stood his ground, unfazed by the threat. "Mr. Reynolds, any attempt at retaliation will only worsen your situation. I suggest you accept the court's decision and focus on changing your discriminatory practices." Despite Charles's calm response, Reynolds's threat cast a shadow over their victory. The family knew that their fight might not be over yet. In the days that followed, the community rallied around the Johnsons. They received countless messages of support and gratitude from people who had faced similar discrimination. Local civil rights organizations hailed the case as a landmark victory in the fight against housing discrimination. Charles, anticipating Reynolds's potential retaliation, had already prepared for this scenario. He reached out to his colleagues in the legal community, informing them of Reynolds's threat and ensuring that any false accusations would be quickly debunked. As Reynolds attempted to spread rumors about Charles's past, the community stood firmly behind the Johnsons. Their transparency and integrity throughout the ordeal had earned them unwavering support. In a final twist, one of Reynolds's former employees came forward with documents proving a long history of discriminatory practices. This new evidence not only discredited Reynolds's attempts at retaliation, but also led to further legal consequences for the disgraced landlord. The Johnsons' victory became a catalyst for change in their community. New initiatives were launched to educate landlords about fair housing laws, and a task force was formed to investigate and address housing discrimination complaints. As the dust settled, the Johnson family stood stronger than ever. Their fight had not only secured justice for themselves, but had also paved the way for a more equitable future for all residents in their community. They had turned their personal struggle into a powerful force for positive change, embodying the very essence of civil rights advocacy.